Welcome, everyone. This is the 14th Annual Patient Safety Summit, and I am Jen Myth, the president of the DFW Hospital Council Foundation. And I am so thrilled to welcome you to the second event in our four-part series. I think everybody knows this is going on throughout the month of September on each Thursday. And we have a very exciting lineup of speakers that will hopefully educate and motivate you to achieve even greater levels of continuous improvement across our region. As you have figured out, we have a brand new platform that we are using today. It's called Remo. And if you have technical issues, there is tech support standing by. You can find them at the table, or you can call them at 877-255-4957. And this platform is going to give you an opportunity to network with people at your table. For those of you who joined early, you've already been able to do that. And we will also keep it open at the end for an additional half hour so you can network at the end. Your table talk has been disabled now that we're in presentation mode, but and so you will only be able to see the speaker and their slides until we go back into the networking mode at the end. Don't forget that there are multiple floors, so you can click on multiple floors, and to join a table, you simply double click on that table. There is one feature you may want to turn off, which is you might see circles with people in them at the bottom. At the lower left-hand side of your screen to the right of the question mark, there's a little square with 3 people. If you click on that, it will turn off those circle views of the other participants. So we want to thank our sponsors. Our sponsors really help offset the cost of running these education events, and they keep the registration fees low. And we'd like to ask everybody to please take time to visit the sponsor booths. You can do that by clicking on the sponsor icons to the left or right of the floor. You can also visit our website, and we will be having sponsor bingo. So Remo will keep track of who visits all the sponsor booths, and anyone who visits every single sponsor booth will be entered to win a door prize. We want to particularly thank our platinum sponsors, JPS Health Network, Methodist Health System, and Texas Health Resources. We also have some sponsor videos that we will share with you now.
What does it mean to be always ready? It means having a level 1 trauma center that ranks as one of the best in the nation. It means being named the #1 hospital in America because of how we serve our community. Always ready means in the face of a pandemic, we didn't back off. We stepped up to keep our community safe. It means getting patients off the streets and giving them a brand new outlook on life. It means not being afraid to take on behavioral health issues and ensure that our patients get the best care around. It means teaching our caregivers today so they'll be prepared to serve you in the future. Always ready means having the best nurses, and we have all the awards and accreditations to prove it.
Thank you. We also want to thank our silver sponsors, ACHE, the American College of Healthcare Executives, the DFW Community Health Workers Association, the Texas Association of Healthcare Interpreters and Translators, and UTA Multi-Interprofessional Center for Health Informatics. So again, please remember to visit our sponsor booths before or after the sessions. Again, we will stay live for 30 minutes at the end, and you can click on the links to the right and left of the main floor to access those sites. We also want to thank our Patient Safety Summit Planning Committee. They started planning at the beginning of the year for this event, and they put in a ton of time and energy. We want to thank all of those participants. We also want to direct you to our posters. Posters can be viewed on the event webpage, and we had a lot of poster submissions. The top 3 posters were voted on by the planning committee, and we'll have a live presentation on September 30th on the posters and the work they have achieved. Again, you can find all of the posters on the website. We will have CEs for today. So there will be 7 type 1 CEs through the ANNC. There will be 7 CEs for CPHQ and CPPS through NATHQ, and 6 for ASHRM, and 7 self-reported through ACHE. And as a reminder, to claim CEs, you have to attend 85% of the session, and it must be live. The evaluation will open after the whole session is complete on October 1st. And the evaluation link will be posted on the event page. You have to complete your evaluation by October 15th, and your credit will be emailed to you within 1 to 2 weeks after your evaluation. Post-summit information and recordings will be available on the website. The exception is the Joint Commission session, for which we are not allowed to record. And again, as a reminder, CEs can only be granted for live attendance, so watching the videos on the website is not enough. And finally, we have no conflicts of interest with any of our speakers to report. And with the logistics out of the way, it is my pleasure to introduce our first panel. And it will be COVID Processes, Learning and Changes, moderated by Steve Love. And Steve has worked in, Steve is president and CEO of the Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council, which promotes collaboration, cooperation, and advocacy on behalf of its 90-member hospitals and more than 100 associate members. The council's primary mission is to promote patient safety, quality, and coordination in the delivery of healthcare within the North Texas market. Steve has worked in healthcare management for over 40 years and serves on numerous nonprofit and community boards. Prior to joining the council, Steve was CFO of a Fortune 500 healthcare company that owned over 50 hospitals and managed approximately 200 facilities across the US. I would like to welcome Steve to the stage to introduce our panel for today.
Thank you, Jen. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be a part of this Patient Safety Summit. And I certainly want to add my welcome to Jen's welcome. We do appreciate all the participants. We appreciate all the sponsors. And we're just real excited about the panel we've got today. We're going to do things a little differently. I'm just going to quickly tell you who's on the panel. And then we're going to go to each of them. And first, they're going to introduce themselves and give a little background. And then they're going to each have opening comments that they're going to go through. And when that's completed, I've got a couple of questions I want to ask. But more importantly, we certainly want to open it up to your Q&A so that we can tap on their expertise. We could not have a better panel of experts. First up, we've got with us Dr. Andy Massica, who is with Texas Health Resources. We have Dr. Brett Moran, who's from the Parkland Health and Hospital System. And we have Jim Scoggin, who is the CEO of the Methodist Health System. We're delighted that they're with us. And we're going to do this in alphabetical order. So we're going to first start with Dr. Massica so he can give a little background, do his presentation, then we'll go to Dr. Moran, and then we'll close with Jim Scoggin as far as opening remarks, and then go to Q&A. But welcome, panelists. We're delighted you're here. And Dr. Massica, we'll tee you up first. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. And I see a lot of familiar names and faces out there in the virtual audience. So good to convene in this fashion and see everyone. And Steve and I we were joking before the call. Normally, we get a free lunch out of this deal when you agree to be on these panels, but we'll have to reserve that for later when we're past the pandemic. So, as Steve mentioned, I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Reliable Health at Texas Health Resources. Reliable Health is our platform for safety, quality, and innovation in terms of our care delivery model. So, a note that may be of interest is I started this new role in February of 2020, about 2 weeks before the first COVID case hit the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So it was not a script I would have written, but I will say regarding settling into a new role, building relationships, and really just the level of organizational focus, those were some things that we could use, and I was able to work with as the pandemic unfolded. And a theme of my talk today will be collaboration. I think the healthcare system and DFW has performed heroically, particularly our acute care settings. And it's just something when we look back on this and deconstruct, what did we learn? Where did we perform well? Where do we have opportunities to better? That's what I'm going to focus my comments on. So what was our overall approach to COVID-19? Really what we tried to do was to prioritize safety through what we call learning health system principles. Learning health systems, you've probably heard that if you're in the quality improvement space and patient safety space, but the basic model there is that, and it's really an aspirational goal, that health systems should operate where you identify problems, you identify opportunities, you collect evidence and data from real world operations, and you feed that back into your improvement efforts. And it really operates in a continuous cycle. So you'd say, well, shouldn't we have been doing that all the time? Yes, but we really operated using this model during COVID. Decisions and new evidence that used to take months or years to implement sometimes took hours and days. And if there's one takeaway that I would say we really want to bring forward, it's how do we capture this learning health system model and make this sort of the standard for what we do moving forward. Next slide, please. So the other leveraging data to help guide clinical operations, that was a central tenet of how we manage COVID. This is just a snapshot of multiple dashboards. So anything from patient volumes in the inpatient setting, vaccination supply, ventilator supply. If you wanted to look at what patients were receiving a specific therapy, there was just sort of an unquenchable thirst for more information to guide decisions. So building dashboards, leveraging our data warehouses, that became the standard. Again, this is something that we had been doing. It was a common practice before COVID, but we really accelerated that. And I think the other principle here is that for the past 15 years, we've had this grand social experiment of implementing electronic health records. We did see, my personal feeling is that we did see some payoff from that during COVID. The electronic health record is a tremendous source of data and information, and it also allows you to generate new insights. I know we definitely were able to do that using electronic data sources, and I'm thinking Dr. Moran may comment as well on that during his presentation. So another takeaway is take advantage of the data and use it to guide decision-making and drive quality improvement and safety. Next slide, please. Something else that was rather unique to COVID is just the pace at which new information was generated. So this is a snapshot of what we call our COVID guidance hub. And that is basically a centralized clearinghouse where all the information about best practices and what the system endorses as recommended care gets collected, and then it's available to really everyone throughout the organization. What we really saw, particularly in the area of therapeutics, was that there'd be a news story or there was an article that had not been peer reviewed, and there was pressure to start delivering or using those treatments in the inpatient setting or in the ambulatory setting. And with time, and as more evidence unfolded, some of those treatments turned out not to be beneficial and in some cases harmful. So we had a centralized group we called the clinical operations team that was responsible for intaking all of that evidence, processing it, comparing it with the national guidelines, and then also making determinations as to whether or not we would want to use those particular interventions at our hospital. And then we would communicate it out to the frontline care teams. So that is another thing that I would say we will be carrying forward, is having that centralized group that can process quickly, make a decision about what we consider best practice, and then disseminate it. So another pillar that we'll be moving forward in our future operations. Next slide, please. I think the other, you talked about the learning health system model. The other responsibility that we have as delivery organizations is not only to interpret outside evidence, but it's to generate new evidence. And where there was a real gap in COVID, obviously we had, some basic science studies. We had small studies that were done, 10 patients, 20 patients. But what we had relatively less of was what was happening out in the real world and in the population. And the other takeaway is here, if you look at what we call health system science, the delivery organizations have a responsibility to contribute to that evidence base. One example where we were able to do that was a partnership with UT Southwestern. We had a research study that was essentially a cross-sectional study in Dallas and Tarrant counties, looking at a broad sample of the population, so the seroprevalence. What percentage of patients had antibodies indicating a previous exposure to COVID? I think we learned a lot standing up test centers in Dallas County, Tarrant County, and ultimately we were able to enroll 21,000 participants. The results are still being finalized, and we're going to get those published. But we did see, as consistent with the national patterns, that there were differential rates of COVID exposure and disease amongst various demographic groups. And so, just to sort of carry that further, all right, so we know there's disparities. What do you do in response to the information? How do we change our outreach patterns? Where do we set up our care delivery operations so that we can really work with the communities that have been impacted by this disease in a differential manner? So just looking forward, I think that's something else that we can use collaboration as a platform to generate new evidence for COVID or for any other future problems that we face. Next slide, please. All right, and this is my opportunity to give a shout out to Steve Love. This is the cover page from a story that ran in DCEO magazine in March of 2021. And one thing this pandemic has done, it has brought the health systems in the Metroplex together in a fashion that I've never seen. So the CEOs have regular calls, the CNOs, the CMOs, and those are really just an open forum for transparent conversations. We exchange ideas, we compare notes about what is working and what isn't working. And I think it's just been incredibly valuable in terms of our regional response to have the systems communicating regularly. So one of the things that we will definitely move forward is continuing that this forum where the health system leaders from across the Metroplex gather. It probably won't be weekly like we've been doing during COVID, but some regular interface where we talk, communicate. I think that's going to continue to have a benefit for the DFW community. Next slide. All right, so I think the other principle here is that you hear about, can we get back to normal? When are things going to get back to normal? I'm not certain that getting back to normal, getting back to the way things were is really the objective. What we want to do is we want to figure out, what did we learn? How can we apply that to make things better for the future? I'll just comment again that the acute care system in Dallas-Fort Worth has performed heroically in responding to the need to care for patients. However, I think one of the things we would also take away from this is that the health of the Dallas-Fort Worth community in terms of comorbidities, in terms of disparities and the ability to access care, it's shown the spotlight that we have work to do there. And we really need to see that as an opportunity. What can we carry forward to help fix those problems? So I would just comment lastly that greatly appreciate the collaboration from the health systems, the individuals on this call, the broader group, and we've gotten this far, and we need to continue to work together to get out of this and really respond and hopefully put COVID in the rearview mirror. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Dr. Massica. Great presentation. And we're going to move now to Dr. Moran. And Dr. Moran, if you tell the folks a little bit about yourself as an introduction and then your opening remarks, please.
Sure. I'm Brett Moran. I'm the Chief Medical Information Officer at Parkland and Associate CMO. And I'll echo Dr. Massica. I have I've appreciated some of the things that came out of the pandemic, such as getting to know colleagues across the Metroplex and having meetings where we can share ideas and share thoughts and strategies and innovations. And I think it's been a lot of fun and very useful. So hopefully I'm sharing my screen. Can you guys see my slides okay? Steve?
I do not see them. I still see where on my screen, I still see the panelist.
Okay.
Technical support, can you give a little help to Dr. Moran?
There we go.
There we go. We see them now.
Okay, excellent. So the theme of my conversation is going to be innovation during the pandemic. And as people have said during the pandemic, a lot of focus was spent on COVID initially and how do we set up the hospital. And you can see here in this slide how COVID has quickly surpassed most other causes of death, and it became by September of last year, it was the third leading cause of death, and it has continued to grow. This is an outdated theme, but when this happened, as I said, we did a lot of inward-facing work. A lot of people did that, and you can see where office visits dropped by 73%, nearly 11,000 per week. And you can see this pink line where it just plummeted, and this green line is telephone calls. So you can see that they kind of went up a little bit, but they were stable. But what's really interesting is this blue line, which is virtual care, virtual visits, and they went up almost as much as this came down. And we were able to maintain work and continuity with our patients. But as we finished operationalizing, standing up COVID and testing and isolation and things like that, we started to have that conversation about what can we do more. And as the beginning of my slides showed, sometimes the best inspiration and innovation comes out of desperation. And so as we were talking internally, we said, well, what can we do within the arena of using technology and informatics to try to help during this pandemic? And we decided maybe we can try to identify patients who have a high risk of having COVID by living or residing near others with COVID and therefore having high proximity. So we created what we call the proximity initiatives. And the first part was looking inward. And so people who are coming into the health system for an appointment or a surgery or an admission, if they live close to others who have COVID, is that something where maybe we want to alert ourselves and create some type of strategy and some type of process to address screening them? And if they have a routine visit and they have high risk, maybe we convert that to virtual, maybe we reschedule it. At the very least, we reach out to them and talk to them before they come in. Likewise, we said after we focus on looking inward, what about those patients who don't have an appointment in the near future with us, but may have high risk and maybe even high vulnerability? Should we reach out to our patients and try to see if they have symptoms and provide support for them before they get sick or come in and maybe expose others in the waiting room or even other healthcare workers? And then lastly, we wanted to kind of use these proximity initiatives to identify patients who had vulnerability or risk based on neighborhoods and communities, and to do outreach to educate them. Hey, there's a lot of COVID in your area. Maybe you need to be more careful about masking or isolating or getting tested if you have symptoms, et cetera. And so this was kind of at a glance the proximity initiatives that we started. And so the first initiative was reducing the spread into the health system. And so we would identify patients who had an appointment coming up in the next 2 days, and we would then identify, do they or do they not have a high proximity risk? Meaning, do they live close to some others who have had COVID diagnosed? And if they do, we then operationalized a list that would be pushed to our population health nurses, who would call the patients and triage them. And if they had symptoms, we would then schedule them for a COVID test. We would either reschedule the visit or convert it to virtual. And that way we would prevent them from bringing COVID into the health system, into other patients, spreading it elsewhere. And at first, we started out by just saying if they live within a quarter mile of someone with COVID, and you can imagine that's ridiculous nowadays. But back then, there were so few cases that made sense. Then we reduced it to 1/16 of a mile, and then we reduced it to within 4 houses. And then we pulled in our colleagues from Parkland Center for Clinical Innovation, and they created a much more sophisticated predictive analytics tool that looked at the diameter of the 3 closest cases within a block that have COVID to the person who has the appointment, divided by the total number of cases in the block. And it gave a ratio, and then people that had a higher ratio were deemed high risk, and we would then operationalize addressing those people. And so this was, again, these are slides courtesy of the PCCI team. And so we operationalized, they would get a feed of data from the Dallas County. So kind of working on Dr. Massica's theme of collaboration, we were collaborating very highly with Dallas County Health Department and PCCI, who would then get this information of positive COVID cases, and then that would be mapped to Parkland patients who have appointments coming up, and then that would be pushed into our EHR and operationalized within our population health system. And so we use standard functionality within our EHR, and we created a column in the EHR that flagged whether they were high or low risk, so that as you were looking at your appointment schedule for the day, you could see which patients were coming in. And then we also would identify if they had a COVID test that was positive at Parkland or presumed positive in the community. And we called it presumed because we're not certain this is the right patient. We tried to map them, but we wanted to identify that this may or may not be the right mapping, and people wanted to make sure, so we gave it a different name. And then we would operationalize alerting. So if a patient came in, even after we had screened them and maybe asked them to stay home, but if they entered the health system, we would fire an alert saying they may have high risk of COVID because of this high proximity score. So please make sure that they've been screened, masked, and test them. And so it was more of an FYI, but at the time it was very useful. And then likewise, even in the scheduling system, you would be able to see whether people have tested positive for COVID, or if they have a high proximity, or if they have a pending test. Those were things that we would see within the appointment schedule system to help identify people and make sure they're masked or isolated, and that they're not going around potentially exposing other people in the waiting room. So that was the first initiative. The second initiative was more about, what about people who don't have an appointment in the next month or so, but maybe they live close to a lot of COVID cases, and maybe on top of that, they're highly vulnerable because of medical diagnosis or age. We don't want to forget about them and ignore them and wait for something bad to happen. So we wanted to proactively reach out to them. But that's a lot of people, and when we looked at how many that is, that may be 400,000 people that we follow, and of those who don't have an appointment in 30 days, that could be a large number. And we just frankly didn't have enough nurses to call these people and manually triage them. And so what we did is we created a survey tool, and we would text these patients a link to the survey tool. They would click it and they would fill it out, and it would ask them if they have any symptoms, if they have any close contacts, if they're having any COVID tests that are pending or positive. And then if they had them, we would then ask some additional questions. Do you have any medical needs? Do you want to talk to a doctor today? And if so, we would arrange a virtual visit. Do you have any medicines you need refilling? And if so, we will work with you and get a pharmacist to get some medications out to you, because we don't want them having to come in and potentially expose other people to COVID. And then likewise, we asked them about social needs. Do you have enough food? Do you have enough food for you and your family? And if they don't, we had partnered with several food pantries in the community, and they would deliver food to these people for a couple weeks. And so that was the second proximity initiative. And again, there were a lot of patients that were eligible, and we used a survey tool. We would assess the risk 3 times weekly. This was another risk score, looking not only at their proximity, but their vulnerability, coming from the PCCI team. And then we would only survey people who had newly been identified. We didn't want to just bother people saying you're still at risk, you're still at risk. So we would only survey them the first time they pop up on the list and if they reappear. But, we have identified food insecurity, as you all probably know, is the top social insecurity of the pandemic, and people up to a quarter of people in Mississippi developed food insecurity during the pandemic, and more than a third of Louisiana children had it. So it's a huge issue, and we were very fortunate to be able to work with some of the community partners on that. This is the PCCI Vulnerability Index, and it looks at several factors, including the comorbidities and the age, as well as social determinants of health, and then lockdown adherence. How adherent or how mobile are they? And it, more than the individual scores, had a very high predictability of people at risk for COVID. So again, the mobility, we could see who was to isolation and social distancing, and who was very more mobile. And again, these were all great community insights from the PCCI team. And they have a lot of things they were able to provide us, as well as Dallas County and the city, regarding food insecurity and healthcare, neighborhood safety, and these were the kind of factors going into some of the vulnerability. The last initiative was the Proximity 3, which is community engagement. And so for that, we worked with a lot of the community thought leaders, and we and PCCI more specifically provided a lot of insight regarding where are the areas of people that are not being vaccinated once the vaccines came out, or people that have high risk of COVID and there's significant mobility and less social isolation going on. And then we would do robocalls, we would do text messaging, we had our community health workers working with thought leaders and churches and other organizations to do education and outreach and media interviews, et cetera. And so we did over 100,000 robocalls, over 200,000 text messaging, and several thousand community health worker engagements. So how was the data? With the Proximity Initiative, you can see that it fired, we screened over 1.6 million unique encounters, over 280,000 unique patients. And you can see for the question regarding have you had COVID-like symptoms, about 18% of patients identified as high risk with our Proximity tool had indeed had high risk COVID symptoms. And if you asked, have you been around someone that you know that has had COVID, close contact, 26% of people said yes. So more than 1 in 4 had positive symptoms. And then at the end of the day, if you were marked as high risk proximity index, about 1 in 4, if they were tested for COVID, ended up being positive. So very high likelihood of having COVID if you were identified as high risk proximity. And so the last couple things I just wanted to, again, with these initiatives, not only were we able to kind of reach out to people and try to provide medical care, but we also, as I said earlier, we partnered with some of the food banks, and we were able to do providing food box delivery to people. Not just those who had COVID symptoms, but those who had been tested positive for COVID. This is something that the Dallas itself was doing. And they would again get a 2-week supply of food to help them get through the isolation period. We were also looking at transportation equity and offering rides for COVID vaccines once that became available. And that's something that DART was doing, and really valuable to get people who had issues with transportation to get them to the place that they need to be. And then lastly, something that Parkland has partnered with a national Mommies in Need. So for women who have children who need childcare support while they have an appointment or while they're getting a vaccine, they can drop their child off at a local Mommies in Need place where the child can be cared for and provide a safe place while the mother gets the care that they need. So again, acknowledgments to a lot of people, a lot of collaboration with the city of Dallas. Obviously, PCCI played front and center, and Dallas County, and then a lot of other people. But very appreciative of the innovation that other people are doing around the country, like I said, and certainly around the city. As Dr. Massica said, sitting in and listening to some of the neat things that other people are doing has been really inspirational and a privilege to be part of.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moran. And now we're going to move to Jim Scoggin. And Jim, can you tell our participants a little bit about yourself? And then we look forward to your opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Steve. First of all, I would say I'm an Aggie, so that's my disclaimer for anything that might come out of my mouth. Moving right along, I've been in healthcare like Steve Love since 1980. And first 7 years of my career was either a hospital chief operating officer or chief financial officer with Humana back in the days when it was just a hospital company. Then 19 years with Methodist Health System, both in the tax exempt, not-for-profit world, faith-based world, and then a partnership world for about half of that time. So I was with Methodist down in San Antonio for 19 and a half years. HCA as division president for what's now Medical City Health Care, but at that time was HCA North Texas as president of that division for about 8 years. Went into a sabbatical, 5.5 years, retired young, never intended to work again. Went into a 5.5 year retirement, and then got called off the bench to come and serve as CEO when our previous CEO had health issues and had to retire. Was called off the bench to come serve Methodist again, and have now been blessed to be CEO of Methodist Health System for about the last 2.5 years. So it's been I always say to people, besides my faith and my family, being CEO of Methodist has been the greatest blessing of my life. But during COVID, there has been a day or two where I would say I could have used a little bit less blessing. So nonetheless, it's been an interesting time. And I'm honored to be here. Linda Scribner, who's Director of Quality over at Methodist Dallas, our largest of our hospitals, asked me if I would consider doing this. And I said, well, what can I tell the group about safety? And she said, just show up and talk. So I have no PowerPoints or anything like that. And I really enjoyed learning from Dr. Maska, Dr. Moran, and both confirmed what I was already worried about coming into this morning, which is how do you follow two experts? And how do you address about safety a group of largely experts? And so I'll just, here goes. I'll do the best I can. And leading up to Methodist admitting its first patient, I guess it was on March the 10th. We all lived at that time, more so than at any point in our careers ever, probably more uncertainty, more ambiguity, more unknowns than knowns. And we're all of us going through preparation, several months worth of preparation for this virus and for its now variants, and with more limited knowledge than I think any of us have been used to in our careers. And with all of that preparation, I'll never forget March the 10th. I'll never forget March the 10th. That was when we saw our first COVID patient. And with all of that preparation and all of that, we've got these processes in place, and here's what we're going to do when these COVID patients hit our hospital. I would say that in the words of the great philosopher Mike Tyson, the boxer Mike Tyson, and you've heard this before, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I think that those first few days and even first few weeks of COVID for all of us, but in particular myself, gave me a new appreciation for that quote, because we took a lot of body blows. We had to change on a dime, as has already been mentioned by the physicians, and it was just one of the just a chaotic time. And I've always said in healthcare, excuse me, you have two gears: chaos and controlled chaos. Well, I think we had to find a third gear as relates to COVID, particularly in those early days. And so what are a few of the things that stand out for me from a health system leader perspective that may have made a difference, but from a little different vantage point from a safety perspective, and maybe a couple of learnings from that? And of course, there are learnings from the pandemic that we all share in common: PPE management and availability and use, how we design our facilities, both tweaks and changes we could make during the pandemic, and how we design new hospitals and new facilities going forward. I think that's something that is squarely in front of us in terms of looking at new designs. Use of telemedicine, use of artificial intelligence through the EPIC system, and early identification of certain types of patients and conditions, particularly sepsis, in-home therapies that heretofore we might never have thought about sending a patient home on, but all of the health systems learned in terms of in-home oxygen therapy, and because our hospitals were so full that we found safe ways to be able to deliver certain therapies. That's the one that immediately comes to mind. Surge planning. Where do we put patients? How many can we accommodate? How do we redeploy our staff and utilize our facilities? And there's just so many more. In the 10 minutes that I have, and I'll go over 10, I promise you, but in the 10 minutes that I have, there's so many more. I can't even list them all, much less talk about them. But I think that we've all had learnings in each of those areas. And so I'm going to move on. I'm going to take a little bit different tack, a little bit different direction. And I call this particular piece, the next couple of minutes, the steer right and drive through the smoke. And I've put this in quotes in my own notes, but I'm not sure it's an exact quote, and I'm a king paraphraser. But if you saw the movie Days of Thunder, it's an old movie about race car drivers, and Tom Cruise, his character, and this other guy called Rowdy. They hated each other, they raced each other, and they had this horribly tragic wreck in the middle of a race because they were so focused on hating each other. And it created this huge pile up and this huge pile of smoke and a lot of debris. And the nemesis of Tom Cruise in the movie basically was never able to drive again. Tom Cruise was afraid to drive again. But this set of circumstances brought them together, and Rowdy asked Tom to drive for him to basically allow him to maintain his sponsorship so he could take care of his family. Well, Cruise was scared to death. I'm fast forwarding. He was in the race, racing Rowdy's car and going around the track, driving very tentatively because he was afraid. He was afraid because what had happened to him before. And all of a sudden, a similar wreck, huge pile up, huge cloud of smoke. And so Cruise was very nervous, and Robert Duvall was yelling at him through the microphone, steer right and accelerate through the smoke, steer right and drive through the smoke. And so as I look at this pandemic, there was a whole lot of smoke, there was a whole lot of debris, there was a whole lot of uncertainty, and frankly, there was a whole lot of fear on a lot of people's parts. And mine included, in terms of how do we best take care of our patients? How do we best take care of our staff? And, sometimes you just have to make the best call you can, or the best calls you can, based upon very limited information and in spite of the fears of the moment. And our, so in essence, what we did is we picked a spot in the COVID smoke, and we accelerated and drove through that smoke and came out the other end with additional learnings, with better protocols for treating patients and so forth. But we had to pick a spot and we had to drive through the smoke. And our most important spot that we picked from a Methodist health system perspective was, and this is in the context of safety, is that if we take care of the Methodist family and meet its needs, the Methodist family can and will take care of each other and take care of our patients. And I can't think of a greater premise on which to build toward patient safety than that very concept. And there were a number of things that we did. For one, stock market crashed. Our hospitals were largely empty of elective and non-emergent types of cases. Revenues were way down. And yet at the beginning, we picked a spot and we said, don't put one requisition on hold, continue to hire as if there is no pandemic. And thank goodness we did, because we knew we would need every one of those staff going forward. And certainly we have in spades, and I'm glad we took that on. All of the health systems, us included, implemented aggressive pay practices. And that was almost from day one, before there were CARES Act monies to even be contemplated, before that was a glimmer in any lawmaker's eye. And probably the most significant thing that we did is, at one time we had when we had closed down elective surgeries, we had moved a bunch of people home, and a lot of them, this is one of the learnings, were working from home. We probably had 5% of our staff that couldn't be here. That's about 500 people were at home, but they couldn't work from home. And the thing we tried to do in that context of taking care of our staff and then taking care of our patients was to reassure every employee, you will not go without a paycheck. And that took what we wanted to do. When you think about the cloud of the pandemic, the smoke of the pandemic, that acknowledged the fears and the risks, and it took pay concerns off of the table. And then lastly, we learned a lot about communicate, and when you're sick of communicating, then communicate some more. And if that works during the pandemic, then why shouldn't we carry that concept forward? And maybe, just maybe, we'll be a better organization and better connected to our staff and better connected to each other in terms of how the health systems work together. I know that I'm used to, in my 40 some odd year career, executives like to walk in a room and like to have thought things through, and they like to have the answers. Never before in my career have I felt there were more times I was saying, I'm not sure what we should do. I don't know what to do. And so as a consequence, while I've always prided myself in being a good listener, out of necessity, we learned to listen even better as senior executives, from our disaster preparedness committee, from the chief medical officers, medical directors, and others, from our clinical and quality leaders. And how well we listened were in the first few weeks of the pandemic. I think with some of you all sitting around this room, sitting around this table from Methodist, we were sitting in my office at 9 or 10 o'clock at night listening, because we didn't have answers. We were bouncing things off of each other, taking the recommendations of the committees and our leaders. And so, if you listen better out of necessity and in the midst of a pandemic, and you're better for it, then maybe, just maybe, going forward, we should apply that principle going forward. And then, as has already been mentioned, I think Dr. Masica mentioned this, the value of the broader healthcare community pulling together almost daily. CEO calls, CMO calls, CMOs reporting out to the CEOs, sometimes joint calls where we were able to take best practices from every health system, and each of us had something to contribute. We were all working on the same things, but we had all, to varying degrees, excelled in certain areas and had better thoughts or were more advanced in certain areas. Everybody just opened their playbook, were completely transparent in ways probably we've never experienced before, and we were made better as a consequence of that. And I would say that we were safer as a consequence of that, both our patients as well as our staff. And it did forge some relationships that I think we already had good relationships, but this forged relationships to a different level when you're in the bunker together, that I think will serve us well as a healthcare community going forward. And lastly, just in terms of wrapping up here, because I know Steve's just dying to ask a few questions, to each of you, the 190 or so of you that are on this call, I just want to express my heartfelt thanks, particularly to the Methodist team, because you're the team I know the best, but to all of you for what you've endured, all you mean to your organization, to the patients and communities you serve, to each other. This pandemic is not over. So let's continue to be transparent. Let's continue to open our book, so to speak, our playbook to each other in terms of what we can share. And let's lock arms and not only survive this pandemic, but thrive in the midst of it. And lastly, I've never started an IV, given a vaccine, performed surgery, changed a catheter, all those things that I'm not qualified to do. But my hope and my prayer every day when I get up is that an executive leader, through whatever actions and decisions that we make, that somehow, some way, we can create a safer environment for our patients, first and foremost, our staff, first and foremost. And I just say, God bless you all for all of you've done. And thank you. Steve, back to you.
Thanks, Jim. And thanks to the three opening remarks. Excellent. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, looking at the time that's left. And even though this is different than what I told Jen Miff, but that's okay. She's used to me not doing what I say I'm going to do. I'm going to ask each of you a question, but I'm going to incorporate in the question some of the Q&A that I've already read that came in. And if you could limit your answer to about 3 minutes, then I know we can get through these. So I'm going to cue it up. start with you, Dr. Massacre. You know, I can only imagine you and Dr. Moran being in medical school. Here are the symptoms for appendicitis. Here are the symptoms for kidney stone. Here's the clinical protocol. Now we have COVID-19. Nobody knew what in the heck it was and how to treat it. Can you elaborate just a little bit on how people move quickly, clinicians adapted? And then one of the questions from Q&A, how did you align all of the THR hospitals to do this and move it on a dime?
Yeah, so great question. And I'll start by saying, since Jim already put a racing analogy on the board, I think the other racing analogy that comes into play here is the term "save your tread." Don't burn your tires up in the first quarter of the race, or you'll be hurt and you won't get to the finish line. So, and I think we can tie that into your question there. So, one of the things that we found with COVID is the same disease in general, but it takes many different forms with these variants in terms of transmission risk, in terms of if a patient who actually gets the disease, how severe it is, the population it affects. So you have to be, the principles of flexibility and adapting rapidly as information comes in have never been more important. So that's one thing we know about the variant. The other thing that's important from a health system standpoint is patience. There will be, people will find anything on the web. You will get articles that have not been reviewed, have not been peer reviewed, and they'll be purported as sort of the treatment that everyone has to have. But what I would say, the caution there is that's the time point where you really need to be deliberate. You want to rely on your processes for vetting evidence and really doing your due diligence on whether or not you should implement something. And that really happens both ways. Obviously we vet things at a system level and then we pass it on via the communication cascade. But we saw this quite a bit. Our cultures, and I think this is true of all our systems, also encourage local innovation at the hospital and clinic level. That's good. But what we want to make sure is that those innovations are safe and that particularly if there's something that works, we want to scale that up. So I think that it goes both ways in terms of interpreting the evidence and then piloting new practices. And then lastly, I think, and this is a theme that you've, the council has helped us on, is really pushing the message that prevention through vaccination, through the social distancing, the other mitigation efforts, always is more important than treatment. We're looking for more treatments for COVID. There's been sort of the scientific and the clinical research has created some options, but universally, the best thing that we can do as a community is to prevent the disease and to make sure that as many people as possible are vaccinated. And so the last thing I'll say is one of the ways that we communicated was through multiple levels of incident command. So we have a system incident command. Each of the hospitals have an incident command. And those were essentially day-to-day or at a minimum weekly. They would meet, talk about patient census, what problems need to be solved. You would have representation there from clinical, operations, supply chain, all the groups that you would need to solve a problem collectively in real time would be at the table. We then also used different opportunities, and actually our weekly safety briefing, we used that as a forum that the breaking news that our hospital leaders needed to know and cascade down to their teams. That also became sort of a clearinghouse for information. And lastly, a single source of truth. As I mentioned, we have a web-based, we call it the COVID Hub. So all the best practices, policies, things that a frontline care provider would need to know, we have collected it in that one place. And that is, that's considered, what goes onto the hub is we consider that the system recommendations on care approaches. So those elements, Steve, in response to your question.
Thank you. Dr. Moran, you mentioned obviously and gave great detail on the proximity and vulnerability index, but there was a great question from the participants. How did you effectively communicate with people saying, based on where you live, we're going to isolate you? And more importantly, also, was there any way to apply any of this to the people that you treat in the correctional institutions?
Yeah, great questions. The fact of the matter is we were doing universal screening of everybody coming in the health system. So we were honestly already asking them those questions. Have you had any COVID symptoms? Have you been around anybody close who you know has COVID? So when they came in, they were already being screened at the door before they even got into the clinic. So what we did is we used this as an opportunity not to further screen or isolate them, but actually to educate them. And so at that point, if they had already gotten into the clinic, they had been screened and presumably the answers were negative, but the risk was still there. And so we created that alert, which I showed in my slides, to prompt the clinical staff to educate the patient and say, there are a lot of people in your area with COVID, and you really need to be careful about isolating and masking and monitoring for symptoms. And if you have symptoms, you need to quarantine and get tested. And so it was an education opportunity more than anything. Regarding correctional health, you're absolutely right. And we had huge outbreaks of COVID in the jail. And we were in the midst of trying to operationalize these proximity initiatives for them when it got so predominant that they began to, they didn't have enough ability and reagent to test everybody for a while. Now they are. But at that point, what they did is they operationalized a process where they would quarantine new prisoners for a period of time. So everybody who was new got quarantined and monitored for symptoms, and then they would be put back into the general population after that period of time. And so before we were able to operationalize it, because it's a lot more logistically difficult to try to get the home addresses from every person that's brought into prison, they just began universal quarantine, and now they have universal testing, thankfully. So they have that. But that's a great question, and we were looking to use that. And we're still looking to use some geomapping and social determinant insights to help us with prisoners and correctional health patients when they leave jail to try to ensure continuity. So these are the kind of things, as Dr. Masica said, and Mr. that we are trying to operationalize and learn from the lessons from this pandemic and not let that be lost, and to grow from them and to kind of build on them.
Good point. I will tell you, in the Q&A, there were a lot of comments about they hope that you and PCCI will take a lot of this and use it in the future for social drivers of health and chronic illness. So some good positive feedback in the Q&A. Jim, I want to turn to you. Just based on hearing you, we know you have strong convictions and you believe in mission and you believe in values. When you're in the middle of the pandemic, as you say, and you kind of have to change once you get punched in the nose or in the face, as Mike Tyson said, how do you hang on to those mission and values in the middle of a pandemic? And in the Q&A, someone said, were there any metrics or things that you looked at to know that your leadership was really touching the people at Methodist and they were following you and your lead during this pandemic?
Well, thank you for that, Steve. First of all, I would say that even in a pandemic, not because of a pandemic, but even in a pandemic, if mission and values and culture and care commitments, et cetera, if those are not front and center, my personal view is then it's really not your mission, it's really not your values, and it's really not your care commitments. I mentioned some of the things we tried to do to take care of families so that the family would take care of each other and take good care of our patients, and they have certainly done that. Gosh, I don't have any, the only metrics I can think of right off the top of my head are that, number one, we just completed an employee engagement survey about a month ago, I guess it was, maybe a month and a half ago. And the last one we did was pre-pandemic with no pandemic coming down the pike. And we actually scored at the 81st percentile of engaged employees compared to a national database, which was as high, if not a little higher, than pre-pandemic. I think that's a tribute, not to me, but to our leaders, to their level of engagement, to the level of concern, et cetera. That's one way of evaluating it when we look at it. So that's one metrics. I think that our mission played out in maybe, dozens of ways, but there are two or three that immediately come to mind. One is that at a time when we could have put the brakes on and backed away from capital commitments and things of that nature, we actually asked our board for additional monies in addition to what monies we had planned to spend. And in a couple of areas, one in particular, in one of our southern sector hospitals in some of the most underserved communities of Dallas and of this region, we committed to a $72 million new emergency department that could have easily been put off in the middle of a pandemic and said, let's see how all this plays out. But that was one of our original hospitals and our original mission, 94-year history of caring for the southern sector. And we said, no, instead of tapping the brakes, we're going to accelerate. And so that's just an example. I think a second one is with our vaccine clinics. When that all started, back in December, our emphasis was to vaccinate as many and from any source as we could, but we had a particular emphasis on that 94-year mission and purpose in the southern sector to serve underserved communities. And we took our vaccine clinics on the road and vaccinated thousands of people in southern Dallas County. And I'm proud to say that the zip code closest in to Methodist Dallas, which is where our major vaccination clinic was, that has the highest penetration rate. And some weeks back, maybe a month or two back, it was reported that it had reached herd immunity. And gosh, that's something that's always at our core, always will be at our core, and that we would never step away from. But then finally, I would say, since you gave me 3 and I took 5, is that we saw, because of the 2 of our 12 hospitals are located in the southern sector of Dallas, and within Methodist in general, but largely driven by those couple of hospitals because of the disproportionate impact that COVID had on communities of color, particularly underserved communities of color. And we share that overlap with Parkland. We've worked so closely with Parkland on so many fronts, and others do such great work as well. But if you look at Methodist normal market share, and then you look at the proportion of COVID patients that we cared for within our much smaller system, it was about almost double our normal market share. And that's because of the disproportionate impact that we saw and observed and cared for on a daily basis in those communities, those communities that are largely communities of color that are underserved. And then finally, in the midst of all that, and because of all that, we said we want to do more outside of our 4 walls. And last year, our board dedicated and committed a significant bolus of money, not to do things within our 4 walls, but to do more outside of our 4 walls. And can we solve the world's problems or even Southern Dallas's problems and issues? Of course not, but that's not a reason not to do something. And so our board, in conjunction with that mission, approved additional dollars in the middle of a pandemic, to go and better serve those southern sector communities. So I'll stop there. I could go on, but I'll stop.
Well, thank you. And I certainly want to thank Dr. Masick. I want to thank Dr. Moran and Jim Scoggin. Excellent words in their opening presentations, excellent answers, terrific job. We could continue on, but I'm already in the doghouse with Jen Miff because I've run over. So what I'm going to do is see if Jen is still backstage, and I think they're going to bring her back as we close out and continue. So Jen, thanks. Sorry we ran over, but wasn't that a great discussion?
That was fantastic. And I wish we had more time to answer some of the other questions that came in on the chat. I did copy those, and we'll maybe see if we can try to follow up afterwards. So thank you all for your active participation and all the great questions from the attendees. And thank you, Steve, for doing such a great job moderating as always. And we're so appreciative of your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we are going to move into the second session for today, which is Kathleen Ross. Kathy is the Director of Wellness for Methodist Health System, where she leads the wellness strategy and initiatives internally for employees as well as externally with corporate wellness services. Kathy's wellness team has recently partnered with the Methodist Pastoral Care Department to work on peer support for Methodist employees and Healthy Faith Community Initiative. Kathy is a registered nurse with over 25 years of healthcare experience that covers the full spectrum of health management and well-being. We hope you enjoy the presentation.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm happy to be here, and little difficult to follow up after that great discussion with all these healthcare leaders, but I'm just super excited to talk to you all today. And this may be a topic where you're already the expert on resiliency and you may have some refreshers, or there might be a lot of new material for you today too. But I just appreciate you having an open mind and possible learning for you. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And is everybody seeing this okay? Can I get a couple thumbs up just to make sure? Okay, great. Thank you. Well, as the Director of Wellness for Methodist Health System, I establish and work with our team for wellness programming and wellness services for our employees. And this year it's been even a little extra and challenging. We follow our 4 care commitments that Jim Scoggins alluded to previously. It's taking care of our patients, taking care of each other, taking care of ourselves, and taking care of Methodist. So really, in my opinion, as the leader of wellness for Methodist, I feel like taking care of ourselves is the foundation. If we are not able to take care of ourselves, then we can't take care of each other. We can't take care of our patients and can't take care of Methodist. So this is a frontline caregiver during the COVID pandemic. She's a registered nurse. She works trauma ICU. The other day, she had 3 ventilator COVID patients. And this is who I think of every time I think about well-being programming for our employees. Now, she is not a Methodist employee. She works for a different healthcare system. She's my daughter. But I think of Methodist employees as my children every time I work. Every day I come into the office, every day I see her in my mind, and I think of our employees as well. And so why is resilience important? We hear resilience, the word, a lot. I mean, it's almost become a buzzword that is overused, I think. I didn't even want to title this Resiliency Skills for Life, but if we don't even understand what resiliency is, it's a little hard to buy into it and say, oh yes, there is a need for it. So it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, such as being tough. It's the ability of a substance or an object to spring back into shape. So elasticity. And for me, the easiest term and way to think about resiliency is to get back up when you've been knocked down. Why resiliency? Your health and well-being matter because it affects how you function every day in your life and at work. And what you learn and practice is applicable to all facets of your life. And this includes teamwork and actual patient care. More reasons. So a study was done at Dallas in 2019 by a group of nurses. And this research showed that caregiver stress and burnout have a direct effect on patient care and satisfaction. And we call that, we call that patient engagement. Sorry about that. I'm back on employee engagement. We call it patient experience. Stress impairs the cognitive function, competency, ability to regulate emotions, and the ability to empathize. It's caregivers, that is so important. And mental well-being can be costly if it's not managed in employees due to lost productivity. Absenteeism, so healthcare organizations, we have PTO, paid time off. You might be sick, you might be on a vacation, you might be taking care of a family member that's sick. So we have no way of really measuring our absenteeism when they're all lumped together in one PTO pool. And then there's presenteeism. The employee shows up, they're at work on time, they get their job done, but are they really there? In their mind, they may be worried about a family member. They may be worried about finances. And that is what presenteeism is. And again, it's hard to measure. And then stress affects the ability to properly practice self-care. And so then it affects resiliency, which is the ability to bounce back. So each one of us has a different perspective on what stress is or what knocks us down. Not all stress is bad. There's eustress, which is a good type of stress that motivates you to complete a task or goal. And then we all have different life experiences, how we're brought up, our culture, our religious beliefs, and that affects our ability to manage emotions and take on challenges. Everyone also has different skill sets or tolerance to handle stress. So what is stressful for one person may not be stressful for another person. A great example of this is Steve Love is in front of the camera and he presents in group settings all the time, and it may not even faze him. But when I'm offered an opportunity to present in public, that's a little stressful for me doing the preps and this whole REMO system. I love it. I'm so glad I learned it. But behind the scenes, it was a bit stressful for me trying to navigate this new system. So again, it's all in our own perspective. So these are some examples here of eustress, right? Moving into a new home, you have an opportunity to grow and decorate and have something beautiful, but there's some stressors that go with it. Education, graduation, a marriage, children, these are all wonderful things, but there's elements of stress involved. And to me, that's skydiving and knowing how I feel about heights, and that's distress in my opinion. So if you want to add into the chat room, let me know what some of the good stressors you have in your life. What are some positive stressors? Eustress? Does anyone want to throw something in there? Children, exactly. Children can be so fun and rewarding, but they require a lot of work, that's for sure. Redoing your backyard, yes, all of the house and homemaking. Positive stress, my two teenagers. Planning a vacation, right? Once you get to the vacation, that's perfect, but the whole planning process of it. Pets, oh yes, who you love and get sick or pass away. And a new job, right? How exciting to take on these challenges. Teaching nursing students. Very good. Yeah, so these are all good types of stress. And what happens when we have this good type of stress? I'll show you a graph after the next slide. But let's talk about challenges real quick too. So sometimes challenges can knock you down and cause you distress. And that has been COVID for sure for everyone. I mean, that even though COVID is there, everybody is experiencing it differently. So whereas some of our caregivers are on the front line and they're taking care of these critically ill patients, some people have to work at home and they have virtual school with their children. Some people have lost their jobs because of COVID. It has affected everyone significantly. So can you put in the chat maybe some things that are negative to you that cause you distress? That's not good in your opinion. Maybe what knocks you down. Taking care of an ill family member, most definitely. One thing to take care of a sick patient that you're not connected to, but sick children and sick family, that brings the emotional aspect of it. Too little sleep. Yes, you can definitely get a whole different personality based on that. I see that watching our frontline struggle so much. I agree. And then juggling work, home, schools, finances. Our children are missing out on social interaction. So while we are all going through this together, we're all experiencing COVID together, we have so many different challenges and things that cause us distress. So the Yerkes-Dodson curve here was originally created for athletes and how the athletes perform at their greatest and where can you get them into this curve. But it's applicable for every single worker. So employees' performance on this on the top axis, then when you go across the horizontal is the level of stress. Optimal performance is with eustress. So it's the good kind of stress that motivates people, that engages employees, that work feels effortless. Have you ever had one of those days where everything that happened was positive in your job and it just flew by and you didn't even realize you missed lunch? And that's when you perform optimally. But then when distress starts happening, maybe too many things with eustress can turn distressful. We saw that in the chat room, how family, children, job, the combination can start being distressful. And that's where fatigue sets in, exhaustion, health breaks down, and burnout can occur. So take a moment to see where you fall into this bell curve. Can you relate to any of that? Yes. And then think about where your staff may fall in this bell curve as well. Do you feel like they're in the middle? Or are there a lot of staff that have fallen over to the far end of the distress side of the curve? We all have different strategies. What are some of your current strategies to promote self-care? What are some things that you do when you get knocked down? How do you bounce back? share with us in the chat. I'd love to see. Exercise. Pray. Yes, spiritualness helps. Essential oils with meditation and massage. Yes, there's a lot that have the spiritual connection here. Take a nap and swim. I hope at different times, right? They're not at the same time. Gym, quality time with family, deep breaths. Oh, I see a nothing that popped up in the chat. So maybe there's some techniques we can talk about coming up here that can be added. Working out and traveling. Yeah, and disconnecting from social media, that for sure. So I want to go through a few things about building resiliency with you, because some of the things that were mentioned here, like getting a massage or taking a long bubble bath, I like to play piano. That's my way to just decompress and detach. But I don't have access to my piano all the time. I have it at home, but when I'm at work, I can't just go sit and play on the piano. You can't just have a massage in the middle of the day. Well, I mean, maybe you can, but anyhow, if you just have a few moments, it's not always easy to go to our self-care treatments. So I have added in here for today a few ways to build resiliency where minimal time is required and it's free. And there's simple techniques, but they're not always easy to do. So there's a difference between something that's simple in concept, but then you turn around and practice it. May not be easy. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is being in the present moment without judgment and with heart. And this is how John Kabat-Zinn from the University of Massachusetts defines mindfulness. He has done a ton of research and studies on the practice of mindfulness. And when you say being in the present moment, you know, that's great. That's kind of an easy thing to do. Oh, I'm present. I'm driving my car in traffic. I see, oh my goodness, there's a lot of traffic here. Everybody stopped. I'm present, right? And then I look in my rearview mirror and somebody's driving along and I'm like, oh, this jerk, it's going to hit me. What's going on? Why won't these people move? Why is everybody stopped? There's a little bit of judgment going on, right? That jerk. So if you are driving without judgment, you look in your rearview mirror and see, oh, someone's coming along pretty quickly. I don't really know them. I don't know what's going on in their life. So I better just move over. And with heart is that piece of, I better take care of this person, let him pass. I'm going to move over and let him get on with his day. Another way to think about being present without judgment with heart is having a patient. I'm sure each one of you who've been nurses or other types of healthcare givers or taking care of your family, you know, there's always that difficult patient. And you go in and they're angry at you and it sets off nerves and you want to respond, but you don't. So how can you be present? I'm present. I'm here with them. I'm doing the patient care without judgment. Well, maybe that person isn't a jerk. Maybe this person is in a lot of pain. And you see what is really going on. Without judgment, this is not the difficult patient. This is a patient in pain. And then the with heart piece is there something I can do more to alleviate the pain? Can I get him more medication? Can I get her something, just an extra pillow, an extra blanket to help? So those are ways to look at the practice of mindfulness, adding in the piece of without judgment and with heart. It's the opposite of mindlessness, which we all can easily relate to. In fact, if you're sitting here listening to me talk and you're on your phone at the same time, and you may have people coming in and out of your office, that can lead to mindlessness. That's for sure. So the stop practice is a way that you can return to mindfulness immediately. And there's lots of acronyms, but today I just want to present you with STOP. And I don't expect you to read all of this and go through it all, but I can send this sheet to you later after the session. It's from mindful.org. So the S stands for stop. You stop what you're doing. T is take a few breaths. So you can just, when you stop, T, take a few breaths, immediately you're connected into the present moment. When you focus on your breath, you're present. And then O is observe. Observe your experience. Observe your thoughts and feelings and emotions. And just allow your thoughts to come in and out. That's without judgment. We don't label your thoughts good or bad. I should or shouldn't be having these thoughts. It's just what they are at the moment. Also notice what's going on in your body, because sometimes when we're mindless and not mindful, our body starts to tense up and tighten. And sometimes it's pain that our body's screaming and saying, oh, you haven't paid attention to me, before we even become aware of our body. So put that in the O as part of the observation as well. And then P, proceed with something that will support you. Take a few moments to maybe have some tea or go get that fresh water, talk to a friend, and just pause. So another way to build resiliency is through a gratitude practice. Dr. Amit Sood from the Mayo Clinic has tons of research on gratitude. Dr. Brian Sexton, he is awesome, from Duke University. He talks about gratitude too as building resiliency. They each one have a little different way of doing it. So either every morning you can start your day focusing on one thing you're grateful for, or perhaps in the evening you think about 3 good things. If you just Google 3 good things, Dr. Brian Sexton will come up about that. So he says that the best results for the exercise comes after 14 consecutive entries. So after 14 days in a row that you have written down these 3 good things in the evening, you get the best results. And the key is to savor those positive emotions, to retrain your brain to remember these good things. So remembering something good, we can all say, oh, I'm grateful for my children. I'm grateful for my significant other. I'm grateful for my job. But if you can be specific, like something you knew you learned that day, maybe you experienced something you're grateful for with a team member. Maybe you had a full night's rest and you can be grateful for that. Yeah, so I'm seeing Margaret has a joy jar that she puts positive experience during her day and the week. That's awesome. Can you guys write down some things you're grateful for? Can you add that to the chat? And Angela, yes, thank you for that note on Dr. Sood. He is on LinkedIn and he's done 365 days of gratitude that he started on January 1. So jump in and join him. Health, caring work, my life, family. I'm seeing family and kids, my coworkers. Yes, there's so many things to be grateful for. Your faith, that we have the ability to live in a free country where we can express our faith. Awesome. Okay, another way to build resiliency is yoga, through yoga. Yoga means to unite the body, mind, and breath together. And the goal of yoga is the cessation and the fluctuation of the mind. So it doesn't mean cessation of all thoughts. It's just cessation and the fluctuation of the mind. It helps with all those scattered thoughts and everything that just pushes at you constantly throughout your day. And yoga is not a religion. It's not a spiritual practice. It's a way of practicing life, no matter what path you're on or no matter what your belief system is. Yoga will just help you get there. And it's not about turning into a pretzel. You don't need to be in a studio to do yoga and to practice it. You can have 5 minutes even. 15 or 20-minute sessions can be beneficial. A lot of people, when they think of yoga, they think of the physical practice, right? All of the poses or being, having to do all of these things. But the physical practice of yoga is only one out of 8 different components of yoga. The physical piece does help you connect to your body and become aware of your body. But one of my favorite sayings is, you don't use your body to get into the pose. You use the pose to get into your body. So the more we can connect with our body and bring our mind and body together, that helps with presence. That helps with gratitude for your body. And yes, yoga helps to maintain mindfulness. Holly says, breath work is my favorite part of yoga. Most definitely. Meditation can build resiliency. So meditation is to engage in contemplation or reflection. The mind is focused internally. Sometimes it's easier to say what meditation is not. It's not stopping all thoughts. It's not sitting cross-legged for an hour, closing your eyes. You can do it guided. You can have a guided meditation session, an Insight Timer, Calm app, Plum Village. They're free apps that have anywhere from 5, 10, 15, 20-minute guided meditation sessions. So if you haven't done this before, it helps to have someone guide you through it. Meditation can be moving. So taking a long walk in nature and you feel the wind and you feel the breeze and you hear the sounds and you're aware without stressing or worrying about things, it's part of your meditation process. Vinyasa Yoga is another type of meditation movement. It's meditation in motion. Or you can get on a stationary bike. I would not recommend a Peloton when they're actually doing a class. I don't know that that's very meditative, but if you have a stationary bike and then you just put on maybe some calm music or have some type of nature sounds in the background, that can be a very meditative state. And then there's also mantra meditations. So saying something like be still and know. Or you could say one word over and over and over. Peace. Peace. Peace with a breath in. Peace with a breath out. Om Shanti is Sanskrit for peace as well. So you could say words in another language that has a different meaning for you. And it brings a different state of being. Yes. And Stephanie, right, Psalm 46:10, be still and know. Be still and know that I am God, right? And whatever is your belief system, use that for your mantra meditation. So I'm not going to read every single one of these little clips, but I love this diagram of the brain. And I think it just gives those, the concepts we just talked about for those who are visual, to see how it can affect your brain in a positive way. We know that stress can raise your blood pressure, raises your heart rate, cause rapid breathing, and then eventually cortisol builds, and it's just this ongoing cycle. But the good things about the techniques I just told you, these elements, you can actually do the opposite and decrease those results of stress. So this is the side of a brain. So if it's cut in half and it's turned into the profile, the frontal lobe is up here, kind of this lighter greenish color. Your prefrontal cortex. So when there is a meditation practice and mindfulness practice, the prefrontal cortex actually speaks to the rest of the brain together. The light blue color over in here, the parietal lobe. This is responsible for understanding speech, but also for sensing pain. And when the people have a mindfulness and meditative practice, pain is actually reduced. And studies show that you can reduce it and help resolve pain significantly. This pink ball here, right in the very middle section, is the amygdala. And the amygdala is responsible for your fight or flight stance, and sometimes even freeze. Freeze is the other F that's put in there. So when something stressful happens, that amygdala is engaged and sends out that whole response that raises your cortisol and again gives the rapid heartbeat. And when you're stressed over and over and over, your amygdala is constantly engaged, and it just becomes this cycle. The gray matter builds in the amygdala in stressful times. So with a meditative practice, a mindfulness practice, some yoga, can actually decrease the amygdala and then increase the hippocampus, which plays a role in memory function and just helps, again, keep your mind in a more calm state. So what I would like to do next is take you all through these 4 things we just talked about in a resilience practice together. And when you take care of yourself, you're able to take better care of other people. And during this process, practice with curiosity rather than with judgment. Right now, when I say, I'm going to take you through this practice, what goes through your head? You might say, yay, or you might say, oh, brother, I'm going to go take a bathroom break, or I'm going to read my phone. But if you can practice from a place of curiosity of what's happening. Oh no, another task, yes. A curiosity with what is happening in your body, what is happening with your breath. Practice curiosity with where your mind goes, where your thoughts go, rather than with judgment. And if you can do this inside in your own body, it allows you to be curious with other people and have less judgment. Curiosity is all about love, and judgment's truly all about fear. And as you're doing this practice, rediscover your awe. Like, how amazing is your body and your breath, your life? Dr. Sexton says there's such a profound beauty and grace in the world when we reconnect with the emotion of awe. It helps us feel inspired and time slows down. So if you are not sitting in a chair, find a chair and sit towards the edge of the chair. I'm going to try and demonstrate some of these. I'm not sure how you have your screen set, if you can even see me or not, but I will speak and go through the sequence so that you can understand without even seeing me. So from the edge of your seat, just root down through your feet and take a few moments to check in with what your body's doing right now. Notice if there's any areas of tightness or tension. Notice if you have any areas of pain. And without judgment, observe where your body is right now. Be specific. So rather than saying, I feel good or I feel bad, can you be specific? I have some tightness up in my shoulders. I have a little pain in my low back. Just observe and feel. And connect with your breath. Notice each inhale. Notice each exhale. We're going to add a little bit of movement. So with your next breath in, inhale, lift your arms, extend them out to the side, all the way up towards the sky. And as you breathe out, let your arms come back down, but push through your palms, just very slow, no rapid breathing. Inhale, lift your arms up, extend and reach. Exhale, push, push, push away as far as you can go. One more time. Inhale, lift, reach, extend. Exhale, push away. Let all your breath go. Place your hands at either on top of your thighs or at your side if you have arm rests. And we'll take a few seated cat-cow. So inhale, lift your chest, drop your head back. And as you breathe out, tuck and round your shoulders, drop your chin. Breath in, lift and open up. Breath out, round and tuck. One more time. Inhale, lift your chest as high as it will go. Let your head just drop back. Exhale, round and tuck very tight. Return to center. So seated chair twist. So just notice back to your breath. We're going to move with breath. Take an inhale. As you exhale, reach behind you to the right. Turn and look towards your right arm. Stay here as you take your next breath in. Twist more deeply with your breath out. Inhale, lift your chest. Exhale, twist deeply. Return back to center. Take it to the other side. So a breath in first, fill up, exhale, twist. The twist is always on the breath out. Inhale, exhale, twist. Stay here with your breath in. Exhale, twist even further. And one more time. Inhale, exhale, twist. Back to center. And now scoot back to the edge of your seat. Plant your feet back down onto the ground. Root down. Begin to notice the heaviness of your body, the weight of your body in your chair. Connect back with your breath. Observe each breath in and each breath out. Now I want you to think of someone that you're grateful for. Someone who brings you joy or perhaps has shown you kindness. And think of this person and notice your body's response. Do you smile? Do you feel warmer? Does it calm your heart and soul to think about this person? Begin to have and feel the joy that this person brings you. Joy coming from your heart. Joy expanding out through your chest. Bring your focus back to your breath. Take a few more moments to bring your thoughts and focus and observation back to your body. Notice those areas of tightness and tension. Do they remain? Have they softened? Have they gotten worse? And then bring yourself back into the presentation, back into the room, whether your eyes were closed or open. Just go ahead and open them now. And just be aware of your current state of being. Without judgment, what do you notice and what is it? What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? And so through this quick practice, you've taken a yoga class, you've had some movements, you went through a guided meditation session, you became mindful of your body, your breath, what was going on right now, and you practiced gratitude. And we just spent a few moments doing all of that. And this is something that you can take and do maybe once a day, maybe twice a day, maybe 2 or 3 days go in a row and you get bogged down and forget. That's fine. You don't beat yourself up for it. You just return to the practice when you get a chance to. So remember that stress can be subjective. Each person has his or her own perspective. And being resilient is about balancing time, energy, and practice. But it also includes gratitude, mindfulness, can include yoga and meditation. And know that you have the power to control your mental, emotional, and physical health. And when you do that for yourself, you can do that for others. So these are the resources I pulled from today. This first one is the study that we did in Dallas. The second one is Dr. Brian Sexton's, one of his many studies, and this is on PubMed for free, and they love for people to use it. And then Dr. Sood's book, Smart, is an awesome book and a great resource. And I would love to hear from any of you if, well, I want to go through any questions or answers for sure. So if you want to throw them in the chat or the Q&A, and you can also reach out to me. This is my work email address. So feel free to email me anytime to get this information. Yeah.
So Kathy, while we're waiting for others to maybe enter some other questions in the Q&A, I have one for you.
Okay.
What do you find are the biggest roadblocks that you see employees face when they're trying to adopt these kinds of principles? And how do they get over them?
Yes. So a lot of it is they haven't been taught, and it's not an automatic practice in their daily lives. So, you know, something like just, you know, always get up, get my coffee made, go turn on the shower, turn on the news. Those are all automatic patterns. If you can consciously change some of those patterns and add a gratitude practice in the morning when you wake up before you start your coffee, once you do that on a daily basis, and I think I'd mentioned when Dr. Sexton said if you can do that 14 days in a row, that turns into a habit and you see some successes for it. So I know for me, the 3 good things in the evening, that was difficult for me to do because I have no problem going to bed and crashing. But, so what works for me personally in the morning is to have my gratitude practice when I first wake up. And I admit I'll go make my coffee and then I come back for my gratitude practice. So a lot of times if we can be flexible, we choose when this is going to happen in our day versus somebody telling me, oh, you have to do it just like this. Yes.
That's great advice. I know for me, I have the little breathe reminders on my Apple Watch and I hit snooze on them all the time and then still don't breathe all day long. So shame on me.
No, and remove shame on me.
Yeah.
That is something. So I'm also a yoga instructor besides being a registered nurse. And when I hear those things, that's what we automatically do. That becomes your automatic, statement. So rather than saying shame on me, maybe next time my Apple Watch tells me to breathe, I'll decide to pause and breathe.
That is very true. That is very true. I do love my yoga. I am good about exercise, at least.
Yep.
Are there other questions from the group before we close out for today? I'm seeing a lot of applause.
Thank you.
I know I really enjoyed that session a lot, as well as the panel. And I want to thank all of our speakers again and panelists and Steve Love for moderating earlier today. And I don't see any other Q&A coming through. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. And again, thank you so much. This was really fantastic.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day and a great conference.
Thanks, Kathy.
Okay.
And I want to thank our sponsors again, as well as the planning committee. We couldn't do this without all of you, and we greatly appreciate all of the support and input and collaboration. I continue to be amazed at how much this market and community comes together. It's so unique in the country. It really is. And I want to remind everybody about the CEs. So make sure you complete your evaluation by the 15th if you are getting CEs. And again, that will come out after the 4th session on October 1st. And you'll have about 2 weeks to complete it. And then you'll get your certificate in the mail about 1 to 2 weeks after. So keep an eye out for that. And we are going to keep the platform open for 30 minutes for additional networking. So we will keep this open until 12:30. So please feel free to stay at the tables and chat with your peers and use this time to get some resilience through networking. I know for me, it's energizing to actually be able to see people and chat with people I haven't been able to see in person for quite some time. So anyway, I think that's all. And again, thank you all for coming. Thanks again to our sponsors. Please don't forget to visit the sponsor booths. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully next Thursday at our 3rd session. And if you are signed up for the 3rd or 4th session, you will get a separate email with the link for that session. So thanks all again. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.